And now I guess we'll present Nat Tripp, who is a person who's lived in Passumpsic for the last 24 years and has written some children's books on nature, one called Thunderstorms and one called Snowstorm. And he's done ETV programs on nature, one called Drawing from Nature and Environmental Minutes. So he's been involved in this for a long time. He's worked with the Audubon and the Sierra Club. He's now president of our local Barnet Planning and Zoning Board, and also president of the chairperson of the Connecticut River Joint Commissions. Connecticut River Relicensing Committee for the Joint Commissions. And he's just written his first full-length book, Father, Soldier, Son, and had his opening for that last Friday. So welcome, Nat.
Thank you, Eric. It's really a pleasure to be here, be able to share with all of you my great love for the river, and as well as the people who live along its shores. I guess what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk about the Connecticut River in the past a little bit, Connecticut River in the present a good deal, and what we may have for the see of the Connecticut River in the future. And to start talking about the river in the past, I'd like to ask you to all come on an imaginary journey with me up the Connecticut River. Let's say it's 1750. And I'm going to really dwell on the 15-Mile Falls region of the Connecticut River, because that's the critical one with relicensing and divestiture of New England power. And it's the one that's closest to this region. But let's imagine we've been coming up this river, which is 410 miles long, all the way from Long Island Sound. We've come past many beautiful Indian settlements where they're growing corn and squash and beans, and some of the great falls, the great waterfalls around Turner's Falls, Massachusetts, and Bellows Falls, Vermont, which were also sacred places to the Native Americans who lived around here, and in the springtime were the site of extraordinary runs of salmon and shad and other seagoing fish. And we kept going upstream and upstream and upstream. The river has been getting shallower and narrower as we traveled, with huge forests along both sides. And finally we come to the Nine Islands area, just above what is now the town of Barnet. The river's quite shallow now. It's running quickly over shoals of gravel. The Passumpsic River is coming in to our left, which comprises a quarter of the watershed. There's an island, Round Island, right before us. And there's an Indian settlement in what is now the village of East Barnet. Huge trees towering all around the river. And we've reached what it was then and is still now the head of navigation on the river and the beginning of what's called 15-Mile Falls. And from here on, our journey becomes much more difficult, because for the next 15 miles, the river has been finding its way through a great field of glacial debris. And 15 Miles Falls isn't so much a waterfall as a series of rapids. The first big one is a big pitch over some ledge about 1.5 miles upstream from Nine Islands. And then beyond that, there are more and more pitches through big boulder fields and gravel beds and shoals. The river, I believe, drops about 400 or 500 feet in this one 15-mile stretch, all the way up to what is now the town of Gilman. And beyond that, we enter into the Cohos area. I used to think that meant, as an Abenaki word for meadows, but actually the word means white pine. And the white pines that grew in these floodplain meadows must have been extraordinary, 4, 5, 6 feet in diameter, 180, 200, 220 feet tall, huge trees. And as we get farther up the river, there are places in the river that never even see sunshine because the trees tower around it so tall. And of course, the river is always changing. There's always eroding banks on one side and depositing sand on the other, and there are incredible floods, of course, with no flood control. Trees are pitching into the river, being washed down, tumbling, gathering in great dams of flood debris. The river's finding its way around these debris, digging huge holes as it eats under piles of debris. The holes are filled with gravel, some of them 30, 40 feet deep. The water is much colder than it is now because of the shade, mostly, and completely unnavigable. Even when you get above 15-mile falls, it's really, really difficult to find your way up the river because of these debris and because of the way the channel keeps shifting and changing. This was the land that Rogers Rangers discovered and barely survived crossing. It was not an easy place to navigate as a wilderness, and it's why the Indian footpaths that went up to the St. Lawrence Valley generally tended to follow the Passumpsic River and up through to Lake Memphremagog rather than following the Connecticut itself. And of course, the fish in those pre-colonial days were extraordinary. There were salmon. There's been some debate about that recently, but it seems there were salmon. But there are also the other native fish that's still around now is the brook trout. We're all familiar with that. But in those days, the brook trout became so big that they became seagoing too. This is something that I didn't know about, but they too were migrating to the sea and coming up into the Connecticut River to spawn. So that was the wilderness. And then, of course, one of the first things that happened once the settlers moved in was they began to cut the pines, cutting the ones that were close to the river first and floating them downstream. Some of them were used for masts for ships, ones that were 50, 60, 80 feet tall. Later, as the land was cleared more, the big log drives began with 40-foot logs, and people began to start farming the floodplain. And with the debris removed from the river channel, the river became more tamed, and there weren't so many backwaters and cut-off blind creeks and sloughs and where floods had changed the channel in the past. Although the channel is still changing, of course, the river forms the border between New Hampshire and Vermont, and when you get into the upper Cohos area, you can still see where the New Hampshire border seems to be just crossing a meadow because that's where the river was 50, 100 years ago and isn't there anymore. So the trees were cut down, and people began to clear and farm the incredible fertile soil. The river had been, just as the Nile Delta always has, the Connecticut River as well had been depositing these wonderfully fertile soils year after year during its floods. And people began to build dams, first of all starting down in Connecticut, but gradually working their way farther up, building dams for manufacturing originally, and then later for generating electricity, starting around, I think the first dam was built around 1916 for hydroelectric power on the Connecticut River. When it became feasible to generate electricity, which was just around the turn of the century, the government was very wary of utilities doing the same thing with electricity that Rockefeller had done or tried to do with petroleum. And early on it was decided that the utilities should be regulated so that there wouldn't be a monopolistic control over electricity the way it had been attempted with petroleum. So the utilities came here. They came to this North Country with a mandate from the government that they were regulated, and also they had the doctrine of public trust in hand. But if anybody, I suppose most of you have probably read Howard Mosher's book, Where the Rivers Run North. They were still, in some senses, the bad guys, the villains who took land away from people and built their dams where they pleased against the will of anybody who tried to stand in their way. They were allowed to do this because of the doctrine of public trust and eminent domain, that what they were doing was for the better of the people in the long run. And the dams were built, and gradually towns began to grow up. Very often they started to grow around hydroelectric sites, or mill sites rather, where the river's power could be harnessed. And after a while, some of the towns became cities, and within a century ago or so, we had what was known as the industrial river, and it was a dramatically changed landscape from what we had first seen. The forests had been cut down, the fields had been cleared, and over time, the river became, in the words of some, the most beautiful sewer in New England. The river really was filthy. I first canoed the Connecticut in the early 70s, and it was true then, and I'm sure many of you can remember when the river was really dirty. No towns had sewage treatment plants or anything like that. Plus there were mill wastes and everything else was being dumped into the water. But still, and I ask you to revisit Round Island again, that place where we started the journey up 15 Mile Falls, there were places, even then, where you could stand by the shore and look around and see a landscape in a few places like that. That really hadn't changed that much since the pre-colonial days. It didn't smell very good, though. And then that began to change with the Clean Water Act in 1974. And gradually, over the years since the Clean Water Act was passed, the river began to clean up. Towns began to put in treatment plants. Industries began to treat their own effluent. Paper mills, in particular, were the big polluters. And the water quality began to improve dramatically. I think it had an impact that was almost impossible for those to imagine in 1974. And suddenly the river became valuable for many things that it really hadn't been valued for in the past. For one thing, the recreational value of the river was tremendously enhanced. Suddenly the fish began to come back. It became a really important fishery. Another thing that happened that people don't really think about was the real estate values along the river began to increase tremendously. In the past, nobody wanted to have waterfront property by the Connecticut River. It stank. You couldn't even sleep with your window open. All of a sudden, real estate values went way up. And if anybody complains about the expense of the Clean Water Act, I ask them to look at what happened to real estate values alone along the banks of the Connecticut River and how much clean water has contributed to the economy directly that way. Some other things began to change too. Of course, people became more aware of the environment. People began to canoe the river more and fish the river more. And then the Supreme Court made a ruling about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in 1984. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the government entity that grants licenses to hydroelectric companies to operate dams on the river. And these licenses are usually given for a 30 or 40 or even 50-year period. And up until 1984, environmental constraints were seldom a part of the relicensing proceedings. But the 84 ruling made it mandatory that environmental considerations had to be a part of a relicensing procedure. And there had to be an attempt somehow to mitigate the changes that had been caused, the environmental degradation that had been caused by that hydroelectric facility in terms of water quality degradation and fishery degradation. It is true that hydroelectricity is a clean energy compared to coal or gas-fired or nuclear plants. But there is still a cost, an environmental cost. The water that's impounded behind a dam is no longer moving. It's no longer oxygenated. It tends to collect sediments. It tends to become warmer. And where you once had a magnificent trout fishery, it changes. It's still a good fishery on 15 Mile Falls, but it's not a trout fishery anymore. It's more of a warm water species fishery where there are bass and perch and other species. And of course, the other thing that happened when the dams were built was that it put an end to the salmon runs and other anadromous fish. We can't forget that there are other fish besides salmon too. They had used the river for spawning shad, herring, even eels, and of course the seagoing trout. So starting in 1984, relicensing procedures really changed, and when utilities went through it, they were usually forced to sacrifice anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20% of their profit in environmental mitigation measures. Most of these measures were over fluctuating reservoir levels, limiting the amount of the drawdowns of the reservoirs, or making the utility allow a certain amount of water to pass through the dam at all times so that downstream portions are not dried out or dewatered at times. Along with this, there have been other changes and other elements finding their way into the Connecticut Valley. For instance, the National Park Service identified the Connecticut River as a remarkable regional resource. Certainly the most significant river as far as recreation goes in New England. And in 1964-65, they began studying the idea of making the Connecticut River into a scenic waterway and part of the National Park Service system. It was a proposal that didn't fly because it was so badly engineered and politically inept. They left the local government and the local people out of the loop completely and had a very heavy-handed approach, which failed. But I still have and treasure their report, which includes a lovely proposal for something called the Moore-Comerford Interstate Park. The next government force that or entity that came in was the National Fish and Wildlife Service with the Conti Refuge, which was, they'd learned their lessons from the National Park Service. And they were much more careful, gradual, and in their proposal to have what they called a refuge without boundaries, they held many, many public meetings and were very, very open about the process. Aside from the paranoia of many people, they really were open about it. And without using eminent domain or any of those other procedures of the past, they have, in fact, begun to set up a system of educational centers, of protective easements on particularly vulnerable or valuable areas, which is not so much a wildlife refuge as a means of protecting and enhancing an environment while not excluding the human residents and users. Other forces came into being. I'm a commissioner with the Connecticut River Joint Commissions. Mary Sloat, who's here with us, is also a commissioner of the Joint Commissions. Joint Commissions were formed as a bi-state agency between New Hampshire and Vermont to help develop a management plan for the Connecticut River and to lend advice on regulatory issues, much as a town planning commission does. We don't have any regulatory authority. We can only advise regulatory authorities. Other forces have converged on the river. I found, to my awe, a secret organization called the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is yes, it has nothing to do with any real chambers of commerce anywhere. It's mainly it's a front for right-wing property rights lobby in Washington. And they leave no paper trail, but they have been selling memberships up and down the valley, $250 a piece, mostly with loggers and farmers, by telling them that the federal government's coming in here and they're going to take your property away. They're going to kick you out of the valley, and they've done a lot of harm, sending anonymous letters to the various newspapers claiming that federal agents are riding around in blue trucks at night taking water samples on every tributary and telling people they're not going to be able to farm or log within 1,000 feet of any tributary of the Connecticut River, and so on and so forth. And it's a very destructive and self-serving organization. So those are some of the forces that have come to bear on the river. In the light of this, myself, representing the Joint Commissions and representatives of other various groups in the region, began to enter into the FERC relicensing process with New England Power, because the licenses for the 15 Mile Falls complex were due to expire in the year 2003, Gary? 2001. 2001. So we started in on this process just about a year ago, and we signed on as so-called interested parties. The Joint Commissions, we like to feel that we represent the interests of people in the region as well as the best interests of the river. NVDA and North Country Council also represent the interests of the people in the area as well as the interests of the river. And there are other organizations such as the Conservation Law Foundation, the Appalachian Mountain Club, Trout Unlimited, and then all the various government agencies, Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Conservation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, are all a part of this negotiating process, in which basically we're trying to figure out what sort of environmental mitigation is called for, and how big a bite we're supposed to be taking out of the utility. And at the same time, for some of us, how to protect the economic viability of the facility, which is a tough balancing act at best. We began this process, and one of the first things we did last summer was to participate in a reconnaissance of the 15 Mile Falls region in boats and on foot. The first facility one encounters of 15 Mile Falls is the dam at McIndoe Falls. This dam was the second one to be built. It was built in the early 30s, 31, I think, or so it was completed. And it's a fairly low head dam. It's not a very high dam. With 4 generators, and I believe it produces about 12 megawatts of electricity. How much is a megawatt? Is 1,000 kilowatts. A megawatt is enough to furnish electricity for, say, 100 average homes. The function of the McIndoe Falls facility is mainly to regulate water levels because the farther upstream dams, which I'll get to in a minute, will generate for a while, and then they'll shut down for a while, and they'll generate for a while, and they'll shut down for a while. So the pulses of water coming downstream, it's either, it's off and on, and off and on, and off and on. And those of you who drive by McIndoe's Falls, McIndoe's Pond behind McIndoe's Falls, will notice that very often the water level's way down, and you can see the mud flats and stuff. And then not much later, you'll see the water's way up again. All the mudflats are covered, and that's because they're trying to even out the flows for the rest of the river downstream. Then, as we go farther up, McIndoe's Pond only backs up really just above the village of Barnet. We go farther up, and we come to Comerford Dam, and Comerford Dam is just about 1.5 miles above Nine Islands, Round Island there. And that was built on that big rock ledge that I described in our first trip up the river. And that was the first dam to be built, and it was an extraordinary operation. It's still mind-boggling. And again, Howard Mosher, when he wrote Where the Rivers Flow North, he was really basing his book on a lot of the research he did here at the Athenaeum about the building of Comerford Dam, which was an amazing event in this part of the world. It is still one of the biggest hydroelectric dams in New England. But in 1927-28, it was pretty much built by hand. They had big, powerful, steam-driven machinery, but a lot of the work was done by laborers with picks and wheelbarrows. And if you walk around and wade around down the shallows below Comerford Dam, even today, it's one of my favorite things to do. I'm always finding parts of picks and wheelbarrows that got tumbled into the river while the dam was being built. It's an enormous undertaking, and they built a railroad spur from East Barnet up to the dam in order to bring in the materials, and they had their own concrete mixing plant up there, and brought in thousands of workers to work on it, and built barracks for them, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure there are many here who can add their own knowledge of that history much more than I know myself. That's Comerford Dam. It still produces a lot of electricity. It's a high dam, 140 feet maybe, 160 megawatts of power. Big dam, very big dam. And Comerford Reservoir backs up for 6 miles or so behind it, flooding what were once parts of Barnet and Waterford. All the way up just past the now village of Lower Waterford. And then in the 50s, they built the third dam in the series of 15-mile Falls dams, and that was Moore Dam. They were going to continue the railroad spur all the way up to Moore Dam. They had the easements for that right of way, but by then construction equipment advanced to such a point that they didn't need it anymore, so they didn't bother with that. Moore Dam is almost as big as Comerford, produces a little bit more electricity, maybe a little bit less, around 180 megawatts. Yeah, I don't know. But it's a big dam. Altogether, all three dams produce 360 megawatts of power. And they still comprise it's still the biggest hydroelectric installation in New England. Moore Reservoir backs up for 11, 12 miles. It's a big body of water. Along the shoreline of Moore Reservoir, there are 32 miles of undeveloped shoreline. There isn't another body of water like that around here. 32 miles of undeveloped shoreline are pretty hard to find these days. Together, the 15-mile Falls complex is mainly used for peak power generation. Our power needs are very low during the night, but it peaks. It peaks once in the early mid-morning hours, then it peaks again in the early afternoon, evening hours, when people are using their clothes dryers, their toasters, their ovens, and everything. It takes a long time for a conventional generating plant to respond to these peaks. A fuel-fired plant, even a nuclear plant, takes hours and hours to build up enough of a head of steam, so to speak, to start generating power. And this is where the real value of a hydroelectric plant is. They can start generating power not at the flip of a switch, but at the opening of a gate, and there's no other way of doing it. And they can store electricity by letting the dam fill up overnight. And there's no other effective way of storing electricity. You can't just put it in a jar and on a shelf somewhere. That's one of the weird things about it. Now, that's really the value of these facilities, and it's a value as a peaking facility goes beyond whatever the normal rate you may get for electricity, whether it's 2 cents a kilowatt or 4 cents a kilowatt. If you're producing peak power, it's worth more than that. They can also do other things with the facility, too, that make it very valuable. They can, and I don't understand this completely myself, but they have certain ancillary services such as rephasing the circuit. If there's a blackout someplace else, the generators are always spinning. They may not be producing electricity or not, but there's always generators spinning someplace, and they can re-energize circuits all over New England using this energy and keep it in phase. And finally, as I mentioned before, it is relatively clean energy. Yes, there are environmental costs, but compared to the environmental costs of a coal-burning plant, it is clean or so-called green energy. So we began the relicensing process with a tour of the dams, and if any of you ever get a chance to go inside Comerford Dam, grab it. That thing should be on a national historic landmark. When they built that dam, they really knew how to build them, and they didn't spare any expenses. It's got the generating room is huge. It's bigger than I can imagine any cathedral, with these sort of pseudo-Egyptian Art Deco columns and little filigrees, and it's just absolutely dynamite. They didn't do that with Moore in the 50s. Those days were over even then, and you'll never see those days again. But it's fun. It's a really wonderful place, and that's where somebody should film a movie someday, is Comerford Dam. We toured the facilities. We toured the reservoirs. We began to discuss what could be done to improve the fisheries in terms of limiting the drawdowns of the daily fluctuations of the reservoirs, in terms of limiting the dewatering. When the hydroelectric dam is filling, the river gets dried out, basically, downstream. And discussing the very complicated issue of salmon restoration. And at that juncture was when the Joint Commissions began to become bigger players, because in the process of drawing up the management plan that I had mentioned, among the local communities, we asked each community to appoint 2 members to our subcommittees. Most of them did. We began to get a strong sense of fear among residents, local residents, that the relicensing process and salmon restoration were going to take away from the economic viability of the project and hurt the local economy. And as we looked at it more closely, it seemed like this was something we really had to pay attention to. And we held a special meeting devoted to salmon restoration and began to look at the issue in detail and question the economic feasibility of transporting salmon over these dams. They're 140, 160 feet tall. And not only do you have to get them up over the dam, but it's actually even more complicated getting them down. A proposal to get them up over the dam, fish ladders won't work, and these fish are already pretty tired out by the time they get to 15 Mile Falls. Fish ladders won't work. The only viable means of getting them up over 15 Mile Falls would be to trap them at the foot of the dam, Comerford Dam being the one. McIndoe's isn't very high. It's not much of a problem. Trap them at the foot of the dam, load them into a tank truck, and give them a ride up to Gilman, then take them out again. Well, that's okay. But meanwhile, you've got the smolt, the young salmon that have been stocked or have hatched upstream, and they have to come down, and you can't be waiting for them with a truck all day, because you never know when they're going to be coming down. there had to be, and I still, nobody knows what it's going to be, but there would have to be some means of getting the smolt down the dam, and you can't just be a little simple slide. As somebody today thought maybe we could, put in a big 160-foot water slide for people, and as your admission ticket, you have to carry one salmon smolt with you. So this was where we were. We'd reached this point in September. We'd had our meeting. We'd made our statement about fish passage, and all of a sudden, this bombshell was dropped on us. And I remember the day almost as well as I remember the Kennedy assassination. And that's how it struck me. It was when we all heard the same time. People who worked for New England Power had no idea this was coming, and we'd heard a little bit about deregulation and stuff and things that they were going through in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And New England Power was being forced by what's called the Consumers First settlement in Massachusetts to sell their generating facilities. Up to this time, no matter what people may have thought of New England Power or utilities in general, they had been a good neighbor, a very good neighbor. There were certainly excesses in the past, in the 20s and 30s and stuff that people still talk about. But by the 70s and 80s, New England Power, headed by John Rowe, had become a nationally recognized as an environmentally aware, sensitive company, and a tremendous contributor to the area. They not only contributed jobs, they maintained the recreational benefits of the area, and they paid a lot in local property taxes, almost $4 million a year. And as is the case with any local business being sold to outsiders, this was bad news. And I still think it's bad news. But this is what we were suddenly faced with. I want to talk a little bit about deregulation because it's a subject that none of us really know very much about, and then I'll return to what may be the future of the river. Even people at the utilities hadn't really thought about deregulation. I happened to be working for AT&T when they were deregulated back in '81. But this is very different from that. This was not the phone company. This is the power companies that were being deregulated. And you can live without a telephone, but you can't live without electricity. The airlines were deregulated. Well, we can live with that. But electricity has become our lifeblood, and the idea of it being deregulated conjures up all sorts of very dark scenarios. Like most bad ideas, deregulation had its beginnings in academia. Among the economists at various universities who had nothing better to do. It is true that the utilities had brought this on themselves in a sense. During the 60s and 70s, the utilities, because they were protected by the federal government, because they were a regulated monopoly, they'd made some really lousy investments. They had, for instance, made a lot of investments in nuclear power plants and simply passed the costs on to the customer because they could do that. They'd made, locally, they'd made a lot of bad investments in deals with Hydro-Quebec, which were very expensive. And they'd passed the costs on to the customers. And they had completely failed to compute the possibility of energy conservation. It didn't compute for them. It didn't make sense. Industries, in particular, began to lobby for lower power rates, began to point. Industries like to think of themselves as the masters of efficiency. In a competitive free market, you have to be efficient. And industries would look at a utility, this obese utility which is making bad investments and passing the costs on to the customer, and think, this is ridiculous. And they were right. It was ridiculous. And it was a fault of the utilities and the regulatory system. The industries began to lobby very, very actively, more and more, for lower power rates. And Congress began to make little concessions about 10 years ago with these industries. They began to allow, for instance, a company like Mitsubishi to build a plant that was dedicated to selling power to just one industrial customer at a much lower rate. And bigger corporations like Bechtel and others began to get in on this and think, well, we can do this cheaper than the utilities. And then a real dark side to deregulation was that this was a chance to get even with the Greens. For many years, a lot of people in the power industry have blamed environmentalists for their troubles. They've been more than happy to pass on the costs of environmental regulations to the customers, but secretly, they've been harboring a grudge ever since Seabrook. Among the publications that I looked through in order to find out more about deregulations is one that I often turn to when I really want a good look at the other side, Forbes magazine. This is from the Forbes of June 5th, 1995, and it's a little commentary. I should fill you in that some of the people who are really talking about how great deregulation is also say that someday we may get even our television shows, possibly computer, digital signals over our electric wires. There won't be any need for a phone wire or a cable for your television. And they talk in glowing terms of the so-called smart house, where the utility will know when your refrigerator is running too much, or they'll be able, even during peak hours, to shut your refrigerator off and give you a better rate that way. A smart house. So that comes into this commentary. I'm just going to read one paragraph of this, just to show you why I got sort of ticked off. I'm quoting this commentary by Peter Huber, who is a senior fellow of the Manhattan Institute. Any proposal for open competition in electricity also attracts vehement opposition from those other protectors of consumer welfare, other protectors other than the federal government. The rabid Greens. They're happy to force power companies to give away free fluorescent bulbs, but better communication lowers the price of electricity all around, and that would never do. Consumption would go up, not down, and even though central power plants use fuel far more efficiently than close-to-home alternatives, the Greens despise big power companies too intensely to care. But on this one, the Greens are going to lose. The economics of competition are just too strong. So that's one of the sentiments that's out there behind deregulation, which I find disturbing. What about the future? Let's talk about the future for all of us, just as citizens in this new environment. Among the people that I was able to read, there is a general consensus that our rates will be higher, not lower. There are many reasons for this, but the main reason is that as homeowners, we're small. We're not much of a lobby. If we were a big industrial user, like an aluminum smelter, our rates are going way down. You can count on it. So it's a good deal for industry. It's probably not going to save us anything. The state of Vermont is trying to legislate a 5% lowering of our utility rates in this state as a part of deregulation. 5% isn't much, and how long are we even going to be hanging on to that? But meanwhile, they're going to be in our other pockets, because the utilities are going to be paying lower property taxes. Our property taxes are going to go up. Not only that, but this is one of the great things about deregulation. It happened with the savings and loans. The utilities want the federal government to bail them out of their stranded costs. They're saying, we made all these lousy investments. You're going to stick us with these lousy investments that we used to pass on to our ratepayers? No, you've got to pay them off. So the federal government is being lobbied to pay off, to assume these extraordinary debts of the utilities. Okay, that's number two where they're sticking us to us with, is we're going to pay for the stranded costs, so-called. stranded costs like inept contracts with Hydro-Quebec or nuclear power plants that never got built, and so on. And the other cost that I think we are all going to have to bear if we are not careful is the environmental cost. This is going to come at us from two directions. One is from the air, because you can produce electricity a lot cheaper out in the Midwest with a big coal burning plant, and you can dump 100 carloads of coal in that plant a day, produce a heck of a lot of electricity, and of course that all the smoke ends up going up into the upper atmosphere and falling down on us, not only as acid rain, but also this is the source of the mercury that is becoming more and more common in our lakes. It gathers there in our water systems. Smog, cadmium, who knows what else. Actually, we do know what else. So that's a cost we're going to pay in New England as well, if we're not careful. Canada is really incensed about this because so much of the acid precipitation ends up going up into Canada, and they really want to sell us hydroelectricity from Hydro-Quebec at a high price. So they don't like this at all. So I guess, I'm leaving you with a kind of a grim picture. If we go into this unaware, this may happen. Some of these things probably will happen in terms of the economic costs that we're going to have to pay. But what's going to happen with the river itself? Well, there is going to be a new owner, and we're not supposed to talk about these things, but there are as many leaks in the relicensing process as there are in Comerford Dam. And the latest hemorrhage trickled down to the Wall Street Journal. Cal Energy Company, Duke Power Company, and Southern Company are considering bids for all or part of a portfolio of the 18 New England power generating plants. This article goes on. But these are the people who are seriously looking at 15 Mile Falls as a investment package. The whole generating facility, all of the generating facilities for New England Power are valued at approximately $1.1 billion, and 15 Mile Falls might be anywhere from $200 to $300 million in value. So our new owner, whoever that is going to be commercially oriented, and they're not going to be from around here. Although there are some proposals that might circumvent it, the likelihood is that the new owner will be somebody like Duke Power, who has no vested interest in the region here, and only obligation is to their stockholders. We have, on the FERC relicensing team and within the state government, a mandate, if you will, to try and find a settlement package which we can get New England Power to sign fast. Instead of trying to get through this process over a 5-year period, we're trying to get through this process over a 5-month period. And it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. We want to deal with somebody who is well recognized as a good player, as a responsible player. We want to get a done deal on the table and signed within a few months. We want to protect the environment. That's always been a part of the process. But now, more than ever, we want to protect the value of the facility. And this is important because you can think of it as a resource on the river, just as the fishing is, an industry, just like EHV Wideman and Fairbanks, a taxpayer. We want to protect the value of it because, for one thing, the utilities want their property taxes to reflect, the property taxes they pay, to reflect the real value of their facility, and their real value of the facility is going to be reflected by how much money they can make with it, what sort of environmental constraints are placed upon it, how much they can sell their power for. So that's the balancing act, maintaining the value of the facility as a generating facility and maintaining the environmental and improving the environmental quality of the river itself. It means that we have to think in unconventional terms and in ways that people are not used to going through this process. Instead of, say, fluctuating water levels and demanding different generating routines, we may look for something that can be done at another site in terms of improvement of the environment. Anyway, I guess to wrap it up, I hope I've given you some sort of picture of what's going on, and I think what I hope everybody will do is please just stay in tune with it. It's going to be in the newspapers a lot. It's going to be before the legislatures of both states a lot. Don't listen to those guys from the Chamber of Commerce. And so hopefully we can continue to value and use the river even more. And I guess that's it. And I guess I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions. I'd be glad to try and answer them. All the way in the back. Yes.
I'm curious why, what the incentive is in New England Power to make the sign off on this relicensing quickly. Does that improve their selling?
Yes, it does improve that, and it is also because I don't think they're feeding me a line. I think they really do care about protecting the environment. I think they have a sincere interest in leaving the people around these generating facilities with a good sense of their presence. I think they are sincere about it. Yes.
Would you just clarify for me, you said something in Massachusetts. What was the reason that New England Power let this go?
The Consumer First settlement was an agreement that the utility would be just a wire company. Their only function is going to be delivering the electricity over the wires to your house, and not a generating company. And I don't understand the reasoning behind that, but that's generally what's supposed to take place with deregulation. The generating facilities would be a separate corporate entity from the delivery facilities. That way, they could compete with each other. And the various generating facilities would have a competitive incentive to produce electricity at a lower price. Yes?
I went to an early meeting, I guess, about a year ago in Littleton on the board and various actors, potential interveners. At that time, we're talking about extensive studies that were going to be done on any number of topics, as yet undefined at that time. In this 5-month process, are you looking to studies that were in place, or you doing quick studies? What happened to that whole lengthy study process?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's one that we're really coming to terms with. Some studies were done last summer, but they were only on the most sort of reconnaissance level. In other words, they were really just studies to see what needed to be studied more. And we're being forced to make management decisions based on incomplete information. The studies will be performed and they will be completed. And I think the only way to get around this is to have a general agreement with the details to be fleshed out later when the studies are in.
And then you'll flesh that out with the new one.
Right. Yeah. Now, these studies would be, for instance, an example would be bass spawning. Bass tend to spawn, they do spawn in late May, early June, and they spawn in shallow water. If you're drawing the water down at a critical time, you're killing a lot of baby bass or drying out their egg nests. But we need studies. We need to find out what the populations of fish are in the reservoirs now. Are they all very young? Are the species in balance? And we don't know that yet. Although I must say the preliminary studies have indicated that the fisheries of those three bodies of water are surprisingly healthy. Yes?
What's the incentive for New England Power to sell? They are just going to sell because there's a real profit for them to do that?
They have to. They have to sell the facility. And because they were ordered to by the government.
Which government?
Massachusetts. And they are a Massachusetts company.
And how did the government get in a position where it forced, said, okay, you sell, and they've given them a deadline to do this?
Yep.
You know, somebody's making money, it just doesn't.
Well, there are a lot of lawyers that are profiting on this process, but I don't know, the finer details. Yes, sir.
It kind of, the lecture we were just at, it was brought up, and I've read also in the paper, the actually only part of the rate that can really be tinkered with is about 3 cents on a 15-cent rate, because we're only talking about the fuel and the actual cost of electricity. The distribution system and the transmission system, and as you referred to, the stranded costs, are all there already. So that as deregulation comes along, it's not 10 or 20% of our rate, it's not even 5%, it's a small percentage of that 3 cents.
That sounds right to me.
Hasn't the government, the federal government even in the past, has discouraged vertical integration, and that's really what New England Power had.
Yep. Yep, that's right.
Supposedly, each level will work on its own and not have 25 cents, let's say, that cost, let's say, perhaps East Vineland, and you average it in with whatever else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I wonder if you could shed some light on the extent to which the public areas, the recreation areas, and the undeveloped shoreline areas along the Comiford and the Moor are a function of their licensing conditions as opposed to volitional acts, and to what extent they might be impacted by the relicensing process.
That's a very critical issue, and it certainly is one that is in the forefront of our considerations. Many utilities are encouraged by deregulation to go into the recreation and land development business. So theoretically, a Duke Power or whoever came in here would have an incentive now in this deregulated environment to develop the shoreline and build a marina or whatever they wanted to. And it is, and that is against the desire of nearly everyone that I've talked to, including New England Power. And one of the things that's one of the considerations that we would want to make as part of a FERC relicensing settlement would be conservation easements. Yeah.
This is changing the subject for a minute, but can you tell me what other industries are upstream surrounding Canada and their tributaries? Are they mostly paper mills?
A couple of paper mills, nothing really big. Groveton is the biggest paper mill, and there's Simpson Paper in Dalton, Gilman, and Ethan Allen all the way up in Beecher Falls. Not much. We don't have any real big industrial users of the river. Groveton would have been the biggest, and Simpson Paper the second biggest. Simpson Paper is in Gilman, Vermont, and is it James River in Gilman? Wausau, yeah. That's about it, Mary, right? Yeah. And yeah, Rygate downstream, Ethan Allen, in Beecher Falls. Yes, sir.
The state governments have had a major role in all of this hydro development from the very beginning, because it's through the state governments that the threat of the ultimate use of the right of eminent domain is controlled. Now, the question really is, to what extent do the states now, New Hampshire and Vermont, to what extent are they working on behalf, forcefully, of the people of this state? You talk about, you say, Massachusetts on its own has determined that the New England Power Company must be deregulated. But that's a rather, I know we're getting into a very big subject here. However, it does affect us up here. And it strikes me that it's absolutely essential that the state of Vermont and its own representatives in Congress should be right in working on behalf of what we think is important. And I don't get that from what you've been telling us.
Well, I left out part of the story, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Everybody is working really hard on it. I was with Barbara Ripley, who's our secretary for the Agency of Natural Resources, and she told me that she is spending about 75% of her time on it. You haven't heard much about it yet, but and it's taking a while for New Hampshire to get up to speed because they've got a new governor at the helm. But I can assure you that we are working very hard on it, unfortunately, in about 4 different directions. And there are a lot of compromises that are going to be made. And also, I'd like to know of more federal involvement with our Congress and senators. But it is a very intense, ongoing effort on the part of all the state agencies that have any interest in it.
The fact is that the utility, the generating capacity is here, not in Massachusetts.
That's right.
We should be able to use that reality in a way to make it work for our advantage and not let these decisions be made by corporations in Massachusetts and banks.
You're absolutely
right.
right.
This is the same old story in the past, in the state, in the town of Waterford. One of the major villages of that town, and also across the river in New Hampshire, Pattonville,
Right.
were wiped out by hydro development. And who was supporting it? Who enabled it if it wasn't the state of Vermont and the state of New Hampshire? Because they were the ones who can exercise the power of the right of eminent domain.
Yeah.
So,
You're absolutely right.
in other words, all I'm trying to say is, in the past, I think there's been gross inequity on the part of a lot of people have been hurt. People whose homes and farms and shops were inundated by a man-made lake. And the people who had to sell out because their land went down like that, when as soon as it was known it was going to be inundated. So what is the point of holding on anymore? These are the people who got screwed, if I may use that expression. And the state, in both instances, didn't do a damn thing about it. And I'm just saying that now is the time for the states to take a stand and protect us.
You're right. And I have heard that there isn't enough money in New England to buy this facility. I do know there are no New England-based buyers. I also know of some efforts that have been made within the state of Vermont. I know of 2 efforts to buy the facilities locally because those New England power dams produce the equivalent of 20% of Vermont's power needs, which is a lot, and it all goes to Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut. No, not Connecticut, but mostly Massachusetts. So yes, sir, you're absolutely right.
I understand that, we're talking with New England Power representative last Friday, that They are just selling just the generating facilities. They're not gonna sell the transmission lines, and they're not gonna sell any of the land that's not flooded. At this time, they say they may sell the land
Yeah.
at some other time, but not through the buyer of the generating facility. Now, the generating facilities are being deregulated. The transmission lines are not being deregulated.
That's right. That's right. You got it. That's right.
So, in the arrangement of this speed-up process, ultimately, as I recall, FERC is the one who has to sign off on all of this.
Mhm.
Do you have some kind of preliminary agreement from them that they're interested in the speed-up process?
Yeah, well, they'll look at anything we present to them.
Have they encouraging? Or?
I haven't heard a thing myself. I don't know. And that certainly is a risk. That we can present something that's unacceptable to them. And then it's all the way back to square one. And then what would be we'd start a more conventional contested settlement through lawyers and litigation, which nobody wants to do. So there is that chance. Well, I think there are people that have suggested that as well, one of the things. I mean, what if the government bought the facilities themselves to generate power within the region? That sort of thing has been discussed. Is being discussed.
Actually, in the 70s, the charters on those dams allow those to go back to New Hampshire if those were ever more advantageous to New Hampshire. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court while Mike Love was chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. And the court denied that case mainly because of the fact that it did not want to give the state an exclusive right to regulate that particular source of energy. But that was a very active situation at the time.
That's fascinating.
You probably reviewed it in here.
That's the first I've heard of it. That's quite interesting. You can be sure I'll bring it up.
It's in the charters, and it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, it's 8:45. I don't know. Maybe we should take a break and get some refreshments. But thank you, everybody. It's been a real privilege.